Okay, I'm a physician to start with. I went to medical school, and then after medical school, I got interested in public health. And epidemiologists are it comes from the Greek word epidemic, or Latin word. And initially, they studied communicable diseases. They figured out contagion and how diseases spread in populations. And I do chronic disease epidemiology. I'm not interested in the communicable diseases except in passing. I'm interested in what's responsible for our modern plagues. And I'm convinced that the same techniques that we used to solve the communicable diseases could be used to study what's killing us now. My little book, it's called Dirty Electricity. And if anybody told me then I'd written a book about it, I would say you're out of your mind. But the last 10 or 15 years I've been so frustrated with my inability to get the word out about how dangerous this dirty electricity is. We get into what it is later. That I wrote a book about it. I've also got a website, and what's important about the website, it's got links to the papers that the book is based on. You got PDF files, so you don't have to go to the library. They're right there. You can push a button. You can read about Lou Gehrig's disease, which I think I understand now. And you can read the historical paper, which is basically the guts of the book. So it's all there for your use. And basically what the book is about is, I came to the startling conclusion. I mean, this is just mind-boggling when you think about it, that almost all the diseases of the 20th century that we consider the so-called diseases of civilization, all the cancers, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, suicide, they're all caused by electromagnetic field exposure.
Suicide?
Suicide too. Yeah, well, suicide's got a long connection with EMF. There are studies 25 years old showing people live near power lines, or people live in residences that have high magnetic fields have higher suicide rates. And I think I can explain suicide in Gulf War veterans too. I think it's another EMF disease. But the other reason for writing a book is I think the cancer-causing qualities and the other stuff I stumbled on go back to Edison, but in the last 30 years we've had this explosion of new technologies for communication and the radio frequency radiation from cell phones and cell towers, terrestrial antennas, Wi-Fi in schools, on airplanes. Of all places to have Wi-Fi, they beam it up from the ground, they pick it up, amplify it, and send it through the plane, this metal cylinder where you're going to get reflections and hot spots. I mean, I won't fly one of those anymore. I may never fly. And there's some other cockamamie schemes. Internet over power lines, broadband internet, so you can plug your computer into any outlet. That'd guarantee your house is hot as a pistol all the time. And then personal electronic equipment like my hot little computer here. Okay, now I guess let's talk about what dirty electricity is. On this graph here, the wavy red line is a 60-cycle oscilloscope tracing on a Fluke 199B. And you can't see it with this magnification, but if you look carefully at it, you get these little tiny bumps in it. That should be perfectly smooth. And if you put that current through a high-pass filter and eliminate the 60-cycle stuff and magnify it, you get the blue jiggly bumpy stuff is high-frequency transients and called dirty electricity and harmonics. And what's causing it in this situation, this bike shop was over 20,000 units on the modified meter. It was about 20 feet from the base of another cell tower in a strip mall over here in Indio. I shop in a Mexican bakery there, and the bike shop has moved, thank God. So I went in and asked the guy if I could measure what was in his shop, and he let me do it. And I got over 20,000 units. And I measured 4 or 5 other shops in the mall, and they're all high. Oh, but you see, cell towers, they put out that they're plugged into the grid, so they operate on direct current. They operate on alternating current, but their guts run on the electronics of all transmitters, cell towers, FM, AM, your computer. Everything runs on direct current. So the devices that change the alternating to direct are called switching power supplies, or switch mode power supplies, or inverters. Same problem with solar and with wind. They don't generate at grid frequency, so they have to change it to match. But these cell towers, they interrupt the current flow and inject this dirty electricity back into the grid. So this strip mall was right near the cell tower, and they were suffering just not only the radio frequency coming off the top that makes your cell phone work, but this dirty electricity that was pumped back into the grid that was contaminating the whole area, and the ground too, because I'm sure these things are grounded. So the ways you make dirty electricity are arcing, like Edison's original generators, arcing and sparking. Anytime you see power line, like electric arcing, they're making dirty electricity, and these switching power supplies, anything that interrupts current flow. And every modern, all these little wall warts that use your cell phone charger does that. Every computer in the world's got switching power supply in it, because that stuff runs on direct current. The childhood leukemia thing just puzzled the hell out of me. And one night in 1990, I saw this graph, and basically it's a time trend of residential electrification in the U.S. I was so dumb, I had no idea where this came from, so I wrote the guy published the graph, and I got an immediate response saying, he didn't say dummy, but he said, well, hell, it's in Census Bureau data. Well, I didn't know that. So I went charging down to the state library and dug out the census data, and sure enough, what you have is this remarkable divergence. The rural people in this country didn't get electricity. The final farms didn't catch up to the urban areas until mid-50s. I mean, you had 50 years where you had two populations in this country, one which had ready kilowatt in the house and one who didn't. So I said, hey, let's look at how this childhood leukemia plays out vis-a-vis electrification, because now I knew what to look for. So Eric Osiander, who we were still working at the health department, he was a smart statistician, epidemiologist, really smart, computer savvy like you couldn't believe. So we we dug out from the vital registration system deaths by single year of age due to childhood leukemia, and then we got the populations of births for those years, so we could calculate incidence, which is the number of new cases per year, new deaths per year, mortality is what we looked at, and then we used the census data by state because they had published whether a residence was hooked up. So we analyzed the association between the percent of homes served by electricity in each state and the childhood leukemia mortality rate. We did it around in the period 28 through 32 to bracket the 1930 census, and 49 to 50 to bracket the 50 census. We had leukemia mortality data for each state for 28 through 32 and 49 through 51. There were some gaps in it, so we just had to use what was there. And so what we saw was just this remarkable pattern. As percent of residences which were electrified go up, the death rate per 100,000 goes up too. And there's the peak emerging. 1920, you don't see it. 1930 is pretty flat. It's starting to emerge in 40, and 50 and 60, plain as day. And this is to try to put a quantification on it. For a 10% increase in residential electrification in the critical age class, age 2 through 4, you got a 24% increase in leukemia mortality. I mean, that's remarkable. I mean, and you don't see it at all in the kids who died out of the age peak at age 0 to 1. Their odds ratio was right on 1, what you'd expected. Here's fairly modern data, 73 through 95. You see the peak is there in spades for ALL. It's not there for non-ALL. Remarkably, it's not there. I don't have the graph, but you don't see it in sub-Saharan Africa.
What's ALL again?
Acute lymphoblastic leukemia. And the curve, the peak is made up of common acute lymphoblastic leukemia, one type. When I was doing those studies, just sweating over books with a magnifying glass or downloading 1,053 pages online. I used a lot of paper, and I did this all out of pocket after I was retired, basically. I noticed, couldn't help but look at some of the adult cancers. Here we had childhood leukemia associated with residential electrification, and I just picked female breast cancer as a common cancer. It kills a lot of women, and they had a 79.9 or 80% association, just like childhood leukemia. I couldn't believe it. I said, I wrote, when I did that in 2000, I just couldn't believe that power frequency magnetic fields, the 60 cycle stuff, could be this carcinogenic. And so I just gunny sacked. I knew I looked at all the other cancers, and I was astonished that all other causes of disease, like suicide, diabetes, were strongly related. Edison started New York City electrification in 1882. By 1900, most of the cities had electricity by 1900. The average life expectancy in the cities was 8 years less than out in the country. That's all causes. Average life expectancy. So here's the paper I wrote about that. That's on my website, and you can read it. And basically, the big surprise for me was that it wasn't just the cancers. I expected them because I looked at childhood leukemia, breast, and the other things, but cardiovascular disease, diabetes, amazingly. This is kind of a tedious study, but this shows each state and percent of residences with electric lighting for 1930 and 1940. So we had a lot of states. We got a lot of data points, which is kind of nice. Here's some of the graphs that were skipped in my Commonwealth presentation. Here's the death rate, 1900 to 1960. This was in it. The spike in 1918 is the influenza pandemic. But look, all causes are going down. And that's really the triumph of public health. We started smallpox vaccination, and they learned about enteric disease. In the old days, before pipes and water cleaning up, every spring there were massive epidemics in the North Country of enteric disease, fatal, typhoid, cholera, because when the ice thawed, all the feces that was in the ground got into people's water. So this basically is due to infectious disease rates dropping. But it's not good news if you look at cancers. Here's total cancers 1900. If that isn't going up, nothing's going up. Public Health Service and National Cancer Institute don't want you to know this. They talk about the war on cancer, which is an abysmal failure because they haven't looked at the right things. Here's cardiovascular renal disease. That's not going down, that's going up. Diabetes, the break up here is due to code change. That's the remarkable increase. And this slide is hard to see, but it's showing you the urban excess of by cause of death, comparing the urban rate and the rural rate. What's remarkable is the urban rate of diabetes is 66% higher than the rural rate, electrified versus non-electrified. And the others are around 50%. All cancers, 49.2%, heart disease, 33%, other diseases of the heart, 33% higher in urban than rural areas. Suicide, 30% higher. It's just correlations. They're all high. I don't want to get mathematically complicated, but there's significantly high correlations between the percent of the electrification rates of the state and the mortality from all these causes, except accidents. There's no automobile accidents. There's no correlation. So you got a nice built-in control. And to look at this visually, if you look at total death rates, urban, rural, urban is black, the rural is green. The states on the right side are Georgia, South Carolina, Alabama, Arkansas, Mississippi, states that had really low rates of electrification in 1940. These are northern states in California, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Connecticut, New York. See, in every case, the urban rate is higher than the rural rate. And if you look at the northern states, they're all higher. Everything's higher than the rural rates. And that's all causes. Look at cancers. Like, there's enormous differences between urban Georgia and Rhode Island. It's 3 times higher. And you get this urban-rural difference. See, in the northern states, there wasn't that much difference between urban and rural because they electrified the farms fairly early. In the southern states, the thing to save the people in the rural areas was that they weren't as electrified as they were up north. So you see the differences. This is heart disease. Look at the huge differences there. Urban, rural, southern states, northern states. Look at the difference between Massachusetts, rural Massachusetts, and say rural Alabama. It looks like it's 5 times higher. Here's diabetes. Just enormous differences again. Urban-rural differences, electrified versus non-electrified. If you spend some time with these papers, they're really interesting. I wrote them so anybody can understand them. Here's suicide. This paper's going back 20 years showing electrification and suicide are associated. And here we have the same pattern, urban-rural suicide. And I love this graph because this is a spot graph. Each spot is a state. Here's rural suicide rates. You see a nice upward trend with electrification. You don't see that in the urban areas because they're pretty much all the same in terms of their electricity. Here's my poster children for what we could have if we didn't have electrification or if we got smart about it. The old order Amish came over in the 1700s to escape persecution in Europe, and they shunned electricity. They figured it's some sort of evil created by the devil or whatever else. If you compare the Amish to the non-Amish, they've got very, very low prevalence of cancer, diabetes, type 2 diabetes. They get the same body mass index. They weigh just as much as we do. They eat a lot of nice, greasy, fat, high caloric stuff. I actually talked to the group at the University of Maryland that studied these people, and they just scratched their heads and said, God, their diabetes rates are just terribly low. So I told them it's due to electricity. They just laughed at me. Alzheimer's is low, so is suicide. Cardiovascular disease is low. I don't know if I have a slide for it, but I found a pediatric practice, which I wrote up in the book, that took care of about 800 to 1,000 Amish families someplace in Indiana, in the Midwest. These pediatricians, they've never seen a case of ADHD, never seen a case of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder or childhood obesity in any of the Amish kids in their practice. So my hypothesis is that the epidemic of the so-called diseases of civilization aren't caused by lifestyle, but by electricity, and I think the active agent is dirty electricity. Basically, half the deaths from all causes in this country are probably due to electricity. Not probably, are due to it. I mean, I don't want to mince words. The statistics are clean. So the good news is a large proportion of what we call diseases of civilization are preventable. And and I'm really worried that another epidemic of diseases is underway caused by modern radio frequency. Well, you know, until we got into the computer era, basically since the beginning, most electricity generated is used to turn motors, the wheels of progress, and industry. But now and most of the loads were linear. In other words, they didn't spit anything back into the grid. But now, with the computers and Wi-Fi and cell towers and smart meters, and it's a new ballgame. If you look at urban RF levels, they've gone up exponentially. You know, I mean, we're not talking doubling. We're talking going up by a power factor. Radio frequency levels. I mean, that's urban RF is an anathema now. I mean, because it started back with television transmitters and transmitters in air, but the thing about this dirty electricity that's so sinister, it's in every wire in every house, in every office. 25 years ago, when people started plugging in all these electronic devices, before that, like an incandescent bulb it's a linear load. The current comes in, it does what it's supposed to do, it goes back to the substation on a neutral wire on the poles. But with this new stuff, it's injecting all this dirt into the grid and into the ground. And the reason it's going into the ground is what happened is they started getting fires in the neutrals in houses and buildings. So code changed to make them beef up the in-building wires. But they didn't force the utilities to beef up their return system. So what they allowed them to do is every other telephone pole, they have a down wire from the neutral to the ground, so they're letting the earth return the current, and it'll go back to the substation. Every electron that comes out has to go back. That's what makes an electric circuit. But the last I heard is that 70% of the electricity that's delivered by the utility from the substation returns to the substation via the earth. The evil of that is it makes cows sick, animals that are on the ground, and that's actually how this whole field got started. Marty Graham, testified for dairy farmers because the cows stopped giving milk, and they tracked it to this stuff coming in, going up the hooves and generating currents in the cows, but it gets into your houses through the water pipes, through the sewer pipes, through ground rods, and there's a book out fairly recently called Earthing, and they peddle devices which you're supposed to lay on a bed and discharges your body currents to the earth. Unfortunately, that's great if you live in a place where the ground currents are okay, but you ought to see the stuff that's in the ground around here. I wouldn't want that coming back into my body through a ground wire, because current runs both ways on a wire. Okay, so the problem with these so-called green energies is they're not green. They make dirty electricity. I mean, like, I went to buy a bulb this morning because we were out of incandescent bulbs. I had to struggle to find a non-compact fluorescent bulb. Those things interrupt the current flow 30 times a second, and they put tons of dirty electricity into the grid. Okay, now we talk about green energy. And I'm all for alternate, non-polluting forms, but unfortunately, solar and wind both generate DC or AC at the wrong frequencies. They use inverters to convert from one to the other. But the equipment that makes the conversion injects high-frequency transients into the grid. If you had time, I could show you a couple waveforms from the wind farm down here at I-10. There's about 1,000 windmills there. You can't believe the garbage in the air and in the ground. And a lot of the new junk that's being manufactured, like motors. The old motors had switches to control their speeds. Now they got these variable speed motors that have switching power supplies. They got them on furnace fans and on other appliances. Those things generate massive amounts of dirty electricity. So do dimmer switches. That's one of the first devices that do this. Compact fluorescent bulbs, halogen bulbs. And some of the smart meters are really nasty in that they're broadcasting 24/7. Not only are they putting RF into the air, but I'm sure that since their guts are operate on direct current, they must have switching power supplies in them too. I'd love to get one. I guess you can't buy them. You can't go get them. If somebody's got one, I'll come and measure this silly thing. And I've got all the tools to do it. I know about the RF. I know there's different types. Some talk to each other going down the block, and others broadcast. But the other thing about them that's nasty is it gives the utilities a way to basically spy on you and to control what's happening at your house. I don't want anybody being able to shut off my electricity without me shutting it off. I think that sucks. And what Big Brother's getting us, and the whole thing was supposed to tie to talk to appliances in your house. More RF. Who needs more RF? It's everywhere. It's killing us. It's making people sick. I'm really offended by it. Some of the new homes are being built now without telephone wiring. They're almost forcing you to use wireless in your homes. And schools are just filthy with Wi-Fi's and kids using laptops. And it's just that's why kids are taking Ritalin. Stetzer fixed the school up in Wisconsin, and the kids threw their pills away. Another disease that's almost certainly related to this is childhood asthma. They had 37 kids in that school took used inhalers for their asthma, and once it was cleaned up, only 3 of them still needed it. So, we could have a healthier, happier, longer-lived world, and we wouldn't have to take as many pills and see the shrink. And I really feel bad for the electrosensitive people because, it's a real thing. I get calls every day from them, and their doctors and the medical profession think they're wacko, and they're not. It's real. Stets is electrosensitive. We when we visited a hospital, we measured it for about a half hour, and it was over 20,000 dirty electricity units. And got out to the car, and he opened his shirt, and his chest looked like a meat pie. It was oozy, inflamed. I said, "My God, how long have you had that?" He said, "Oh, about 5 minutes." No way. By the time we got home, drove out here, it was gone. So he just breaks out like mad when he gets in strong fields. And he gets violently ill, too, if he stays there. And so it's real. I bought a telephone for an interview the other night because the other one didn't have good fidelity. I went to Home Depot, went to another big box store. There wasn't a single landline phone available for sale. It was all these decked phones and digital enhanced communication technology. Those things are horrible. 24/7 they're putting bad stuff into your house. Now Siemens is making a good one called EcoDecks. If you're going to have a portable phone, buy one of those. It's only radiates you when the phone's on. The other ones are on 24/7. Magda Havas has recently showed that in a subsample of people I looked at, about 10 to 15% of them have cardiac irregularities when the phone's on. Rate and rhythm changes, which is bad news. So that's what's getting us. And the cure is to get back to linear loads, get rid of compact fluorescent bulbs, make sure that every device that's marketed is filtered properly, and the utilities and the people who make the stuff are going to kick and scream, and they've got lots of money and power, and they've been able to keep this message quiet, but let's get it out there, get people aroused, and to try to do something about it. So, thanks a lot for your... Hey, but buy the book. Let me wave it one more time.
Oh, sure.
It's one of the few books, it's easy read, it's only 120 pages. It costs $10.36 at Amazon, and it's one of the few books you can read that could change your life for the better.